Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and welcome to the Factory of the Future podcast, an in-depth look at the people, processes, and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button right now and join me as we build the Factory of the Future. In the meantime, head on over to my website and take a look at my manufacturing and industry blog and check out my 3-book series about modern manufacturing. Today's guest is Charli Matthews, CEO of Empowering Pumps and Equipment, Empowering Brands, and Empowering Women in Industry. And since this is the very first episode of the Factory of the Future podcast, and since we have a fresh new start to make a brand new year, Charli and I will be discussing the game-changing trends that will make a huge impact on manufacturing in 2021. This should be a fascinating conversation, and I'm very excited. The new normal for manufacturing leaders in 2021 will center around how to effectively operate amid challenging health guidelines. In fact, even with the recent vaccines being shot in the arms of many people around the world as we speak, the coronavirus pandemic will affect manufacturing throughout 2021 and possibly beyond. Coronavirus safety, strategy, and exit plans will continue to dominate the landscape of manufacturing trends in 2021. This will affect almost every other trend. But even with the additional challenges a global pandemic presents to manufacturing, there are some innovative technologies that will continue to dominate the landscape. Big data, the industrial Internet of Things, predictive maintenance, and innovative technologies like 3D printing, augmented reality, and drones will drive manufacturing in the next year and beyond. I'm really excited to discuss all of this in great detail, but first I want to tell you a little bit about Charli and her company, Empowering Brands. Charli and I have worked together for more than a decade, and she is as connected to the industry as anyone on the planet. She is a business owner, a mother, a power networker, a serial optimist, world traveler, and an inspiration for all women in industry. Empowering Brands is a versatile digital media and marketing services company with a strong industrial focus. Charli and her team combine fresh thinking across strategy, creative, and technology to develop innovative and integrated digital media marketing campaigns for clients of all sizes. The media brand is Empowering Pumps and Equipment, which is more than simply an information and connection hub for professionals to exchange ideas. It serves as a vehicle to achieve Charli's unique vision and passion for empowering people. She is also the host of the extremely popular Empowering Industry podcast, which you should absolutely check out. The links to all her websites and to the podcast are in the show notes. Without any further delay, Charli, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being my very first guest.
It's great to be here, Michelle. I love, anytime that we get to talk, and being able to be your first guest on the podcast is really an honor.
It couldn't be any other way. It's just a great way to start the new year and start a new podcast. I can't imagine a better guest or a more perfect topic for this inaugural episode of the Factory of the Future podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for mentioning the Empowering Industry podcast. It's always great for fellow podcasters to mention each other, but I do want to also mention Bethany Womack, my co-host for the podcast. She's the one that kind of helped me with my mission, and I'm glad to be here helping you with yours today.
Oh, thank you so much. And yes, Bethany is awesome, and she's helped me a lot with the launch of my podcast as well. She's given me some training. When we start a new project like this, we sort of have to teach ourselves how to do it. Now that you have your podcast going and I'm starting my podcast, I do think that the listeners of my podcast would love your podcast. And I think the listeners of your podcast would enjoy my podcast. It's a different topic, but it's a lot of the same audience.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's get right to the topic. Let's start talking about this. Since it's January 21 and we have a fresh new year to look forward to, let's talk about some of the trends we're seeing in manufacturing.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk about this. I see it. It's super important right now in this time of the year to really kind of dive in and look at these.
Yes, absolutely. And I did create an article, and it's on my website. There's a link in the show notes, and I kind of pulled together what I think are the top 10 manufacturing trends that will impact 2021. But before we discuss the trends that I'm seeing, I want to know what conversations you're having with your clients. What are you seeing as the top trends right now?
Yeah, I really think that the main thing that we need to be looking for and kind of navigating is COVID-19 and how it's impacting our industry. Even though there now is a vaccine, obviously, not all of us have received that or will take that. My clients are talking about how to get back to work to full capacity with that challenge that these restrictions, COVID guidelines, and that type of thing are having for their business.
Yes, I completely agree. This is easily the number one topic of conversation in manufacturing right now. And it does, as I said in the intro, it affects all the other trends as well because everything is just different now. My clients are telling me that manufacturers will depend on innovative technologies like rapid 3D printing to make protective equipment, for example, which I think is really interesting. Also, they're using augmented reality headsets. They're finding new creative ways to manufacture necessities like ventilators. And this is really going to continue to dominate manufacturing in a COVID world.
Yes, and we're already living in this kind of remote world. Some people are trying to figure out how to get their workforce to the office or to the factory, but some people are looking at continuing to live and work remotely. So it has forced us to rely on these communication and the technologies out there so that we can maintain really great communication with our teams, with our projects and everything. So remote technology will continue to help engineers guide their customers through this remote maintenance task. And I've even seen this conversation because what can be monitored remotely? And are we going to have effective pictures or videos that are going to be able to educate us enough to solve that problem?
That's right. And I love what you said about how COVID has forced us to use this technology more often. So, for example, I mean, Zoom has been around forever, but we're just now embracing it and learning how to use it. We're being forced to because of this, but it is helping companies stay in business at a time when, if they couldn't go to the office and couldn't do business, now they can because of some of this remote technology.
That's right. And we didn't just quit, right? We didn't just say, okay, let's close it down and not work. We looked for these things. And I think that those problem solvers in us, that's what we do. And the other thing we definitely need to think about is that employee safety and how we can go about that.
Yeah, it all ties together because you think about it. Okay, the employees, if they do come back to the manufacturing facility, are they at risk? And how do you keep them safe? And how do you keep them 6 feet apart? And can they wear a mask in these hot environments? And how do we figure out ways to actually be productive with maybe fewer people standing further apart? But because some people can't work remotely, some people have to be there. And particularly in these manufacturing plants on the assembly lines and in the factory working the machines, they have to be there. So we have to think about safety.
Well, I wanted to say one thing here, Michelle. You made me think about it. Also, just the safety innovation. So all the different things I think about, these masks, are they the actual best that we got, right? Like for people who are on the line or people who are been working this whole time trying to wear these masks. And it does, I think, affect your breathing and your anxiety and other things just by having it on. So looking into that and creating that safety element for our employees, home or in the office is
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the safety is important, but the communication affects us too. If you have the mask on and you can't communicate to the person down the line, that's a safety issue too.
That's right.
If they can't understand what you're saying because it's loud or something like this, I mean, this is something manufacturers are having to think about. It's not just sanitation and social distancing and vaccine. These companies have to think about, okay, do we provide the masks for our employees? Do we give them a clean mask every day? And is it, like, as you said, the right kind of mask that's going to keep them safe? Do they provide vaccination programs for their employees? Some companies give their employees a free flu shot. Are they going to give them a vaccination shot? How is that going to work? They have to come up with a plan. And that's not easy. And if you have thousands of employees, deploying that it's an issue. It's something
definitely something we need leadership for. And I think people have already begun that process over the last 6 to 8 months, whatever it is now. But what is it going to look like in the future?
That's right. And we can't drop the ball because we aren't all vaccinated yet. We still have to protect these employees. We still have to be safe. Manufacturing facilities have to think about other safety measures, just being in a manufacturing plant. That requires safety precautions, and this is on top of that. I also think that these COVID resiliency programs are going to end up replacing the short-term disaster recovery plans that most manufacturers already have. They're going to have to come up with the COVID plans too. As you said, some of them may already have them in force. I read a really interesting quote from Hitachi recently that said, "The unfortunate reality of COVID-19 is that certain products and the companies that manufacture them will disappear from the marketplace, never to return." I mean, this is scary. This is really scary. But those that survive, some of them will have to start over when it comes to their strategies, and they need to develop a COVID-19 exit strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've got to look at, okay, where are you? What's your business plan? And, I've talked about this a lot with my team and just talking to my clients about not being able to plan ahead like we normally would. We felt like we were very month to month or quarter to quarter, and getting that in line and figuring that out, I think is super important. And I think it's necessary we communicate and we get these things in place in case something like this happens again, right? So we don't know what the future is going to look like. You were talking, kind of that disaster relief and things that we have, different categories of storms or whatever we're facing. This is something that should be within every aspect of our organization.
It's a storm. You could call it a storm. It's like a storm that's lasting, almost a year now that we've been in the throes of this, and it's going to continue through 2021. We're pretty sure about that. By the time everyone gets vaccinated, there's still that threat out there. It made me think when you said about planning your year and scheduling your year, this affects that too. So think about it. For you and I, we'd sit down in January or December planning for the next year. First thing we do, we put all the trade shows on our calendar. That's travel that we would plan for and plan around. Those aren't there anymore.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the marketing people in manufacturing businesses also did that and planned out their year around when they were going to see their clients and customers and learning about different industry technologies and what's upcoming, similar to this. We've got to get creative. There are some things we can plan out, but we just don't know what it's going to look like. So I say plan it, see what can happen, your best case scenario, and then have that second, this is what we're going to do if it's canceled. But we still want to reach those people. So we have to figure out ways to do that. I want to talk about one more thing here, sure. Michelle, is just that impact on the people themselves and the mental health of people. I think COVID, it has a completely different scenario than any storm, or just it has that fear factor that's ongoing, or that uncertainty that's ongoing. There's things that are hard that we have to deal with, but this is this unknown, and respecting each other's opinions and values that I think is super hard. And I think that we just need to realize that there's an emotional element to this, emotional stress that's in there, and just pay attention to your employees. And I think this is something that we need to put in our strategies too, is, checking in with people and making sure that that's a regular thing moving forward.
That is such a fantastic point. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I know that you did a great job of that. I mean, I have a very small business and you have a small business. I only have one employee and that's me. But you have a lot of employees and you have done such a good job of making sure to check on them. And you can get lost in this loneliness of not ever seeing other human beings. You don't know how people are responding to that environment. It goes under this issue of safety. Even if you are going to work and maybe you're not around as many people or you're doing something different and that's uncomfortable. So employers have to think about all this.
Yeah. And I think it's also just managing the juggle and the things that we don't know with things closed down. You just don't know what their family life is like. And so having a way to give them a place to talk about that and really listen and see how you can kind of help through that if there are challenges for them. It's just remembering that we're all people, for sure.
That's right. That's right. And it impacts different people in different ways. And I like what you said about respecting how people are responding to it. That's really important too, because it's a personal choice in some ways of how to deal with it. I also just wanted to say there's something else you said I wanted to respond to. And that was when we talked about, we used to sit down and schedule these trade shows and now we don't do that. But one thing that you've done in the COVID world that I've been really impressed with is, okay, so we don't go to 4 trade shows a month anymore, but you have created these virtual trade shows. And this is something that a lot of companies can do with regard to training and other kinds of programs that they may have that are just training on how to deal with COVID or how to stay safe during COVID. They can do this remotely, but you just have to embrace that technology and do it. So talk a little bit about how you created some of these virtual trade shows and virtual summits using technology.
Like I said, I miss people. I miss seeing everybody, my clients and the industry pros out there, and being able to get them together on a call just to feel that sense of normalcy was definitely something that we started, right when we could. We're like, why are we not using Zoom technology to connect with our people? Like, we've been connecting with ourselves this way. And that was the beginning of it. And then we realized there's a gap. We need to bring in people to train and educate. And so that's where it started. And I think every time we get together, we should be focused on learning something and educating others. That's where it was birthed. And really, it's the same way that we did the Empowering Women's Conference and Gala, was taking this technology and saying, okay, this is who we had to speak. This is the topics we wanted to cover. This is how we market and invite people to an event. So we know how to do that. Let's do it digitally and bring these people together. But yeah, it was a challenge, but I think that's what we had to do. We had to look at what technologies that we have that can improve bringing people together and the equipment itself. So that's the other part that I hope, and I think we're already seeing that, where people are coming together online to talk about these things and not kind of giving up on looking for the innovative ways to communicate and build this connected world.
Yeah, I agree with that. And a virtual conference is better than no conference.
Yes.
So you make it work and you can still have this connection and still see what products people have out there. You can do a virtual trade show. You can do virtual training. I mean,
I would say in some cases, it's actually better in some cases too, because you can connect during the conference, where sometimes in-person conferences, you're kind of there. You're not connecting with the people because you're there kind of sitting, listening to the presentation. So it has a lot of advantages if we look at this digital side too, to combine both of those worlds. And so the networking aspect, I think, is actually long lasting and gives us a lot of advantages moving forward to combine that. I mean, I can't wait to see somebody, and see them smile and embrace them, right? But it's definitely something that we can use this for our businesses, and we can get better at streamlining it and making sure that it fits.
Yeah, I think you just have to embrace it from the start. And then once you do that, then you can make it happen. Where there's a will, there's a way. What are some of the other trends that you're hearing about right now?
Well, my clients have been talking a lot about workforce attraction, retention, and training, right? We talked about that a little bit here. How are we going to recruit? There's no secret in manufacturing that companies struggle to find, skilled workers, qualified employees. I've really been focused on trying to find those solutions, which led me to Empowering Women, right? But yeah, I think there's definitely a shortage in just understanding what we need, right?
Right. We continue to talk about the trend of this retiring workforce and these older guys that are working in these factories that are retiring and taking their knowledge with them. How do we train up the new people? How do we get new engineers involved in engineering and in processing industries? And in fact, I wrote an article for Empowering Pumps and Equipment magazine and talked to these guys at NEDEC who have created a program to, inspire young engineers to try wastewater or, some of these industries that may not seem that sexy. Finding a way to get them inspired to come into industry, the ones that have the talent the knack for engineering.
Yeah, it's so important.
How do we get them?
Yeah, and our industry is, or industries, the manufacturing industry as a whole, and definitely the water community, it's essential to our everyday lives. And if we can get that message to those young people coming in, I think that's what will make them want to have some of these skilled jobs and make the effort to become part of this workforce.
Yeah, I recently read an article that projected that nearly half of the 4.6 million manufacturing jobs that are going to be needed over the next decade will probably not be filled. Can you believe that? That's 2.3 million open positions that companies have that they need skilled workers for.
It's just unbelievable. It's hard to believe that we're still trying to address this, right? And I believe manufacturing should focus on empowering the workforce to attract good talent and keep them on the job for certain. But how do we achieve that? I know that's the question that I keep asking, right? But I think you empower them to do valuable work and, minimize that physical and mental demand that is kind of a past manufacturing thought. How we define that. And one way to do this is to have your workers currently on the floor put automation tools like robots to work. I've seen this in practice, and I think it's really great. When workers can easily master their technology, they will expand their skill set and work collectively with the technology to streamline the process, right? That's what we're talking about through the COVID discussion. We've got to figure out how to do some of these repetitive tasks that how do we automate some of this? And even like looking at some of the robots that move this heavy equipment around, right? Because they can be really stressful, back-breaking even, figuring out a way to use the technologies that we have to improve the workforce, not taking away any of the workforce, just changing those tasks up on what they would be in charge of.
Yeah, there's no doubt that robotics is a major trend in manufacturing in 2021. And it's been a trend for a few years, but I think it's even more so now based on all the things that we've already said in this conversation and more, but particularly with those ongoing health threats and guidelines. And more factories are incorporating robotics and other automation to decrease the amount of human contact, which is also important right now.
Yes, for sure. And since we talked briefly about augmented reality, I know this is one of the trends that you talk about in your article, and I think it's a really cool tool to be used in manufacturing in the future. Can't wait to see, what that looks like.
Yes, augmented reality. I am so excited about this. It's just the coolest technology ever. It really is. It will be a big factor in 2021. So if you don't know what this is, connecting humans and machines is what augmented reality is all about. And it really is, I think, Charli, changing the face of industrial manufacturing. It's providing all kinds of efficiency solutions. So think about it. When digital content is overlaid on a piece of machinery, this equipment comes to life. It's just the coolest stuff ever. Like detailed instructions will pop into focus to guide the operator to identify the problem and then fix the problem. And it's all these animated 3D renderings in exact proportion just explode into view and visually show the operator how to repair and maintain machinery through these step-by-step visual aids.
I mean, I think it's so cool. I mean, being able to see a robot interact with a human is one of the most fascinating things, because you have to also think about their safety in that. And
that's right. That's right.
Really, really fascinating. I'm just glad that we're smart enough to come up with this stuff.
Yeah, right. And you know what? So what's interesting about this augmented reality, I mean, it reminds me of the Terminator. Think about the Terminator movies.
I love that.
So, Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, you see what he sees. And he, if you look through his eyes as they do this in movies, and you see the information pops up and he can read it. And that's
intruder.
Yes. And that's an example of augmented reality. I mean, that's exactly what this is. So you have the operator looking at the piece of equipment and the equipment breaks down or something happens. And so he pulls up, he uses either goggles or a head mounted display or a smartphone or a tablet or however the augmented reality is connected, and he puts it in front of the machine and the instructions pop up and it shows a 3D rendering, so he can basically go inside the 3D and literally fix the machine with these how-tos. And then also they can bring in remote technicians who can remotely you may be in Alabama and the technician is in Australia. And that technician can come in and say, okay, see that yellow cord right there? You need to move that. Or see that widget? You need to turn it with this 3/4 inch wrench or whatever. And can walk the operator through how to fix the machine right there. Just like the Terminator sees through his eyes what to do next. It's just too cool. And it's going to make operation manuals obsolete. They're going to be as obsolete as a rotary phone mounted on a wall, which you never see anymore. These solutions to their problems are literally appearing before their eyes with real-time solutions. It's so cool. It's awesome.
It really is. It just shows how technology helps us move forward. And when we embrace those things, we don't have to necessarily go into the plant if we don't need to, right? We can just have that image or technology there guiding us. So there's so many things that we can do here. It's going to be fascinating.
That's absolutely right. This is a good segue. I want to also talk a little bit about 3D printing. 3D printing is also a big trend, I believe, for 2021. Are you hearing much about this from your clients?
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned it earlier, I believe, in your opening, how they were printing some of these protective gears and things like that. But what else have you been hearing from your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool stuff. 3D printing, which is also known as additive technology, is really improving manufacturing performance. Recently learned how this works. So you add materials layer by layer using digital data from a 3D model. And it's wild, Charlie. Companies can print miniature jet engines.
I'm blown away. I really am.
They can print engine parts and turbine engines and ultrasound transducers. People are 3D printing pump impellers.
Look, we're not talking about just Legos here, right? Like,
no.
They're talking about jet engine parts. My goodness.
Yeah. I mean, they're even producing food products in addition to things like clothing and pottery and shoes and eyewear and orthopedic implants and things like this. It's just unbelievable. So I have an article on my website. I'll put a link in the show notes that talks about what GE Aviation is doing. And get this, Charlie. In 2017, GE Aviation used additive manufacturing, which is 3D printing, to create a helicopter engine with 16 parts, where it usually takes 900 parts to build this engine. And it works. And they go up in the helicopter with it. Can you believe that?
Let's talk about how much efficiency that is and the lack of waste and just hours and time that we're saving, that we can be working on the next thing.
That's right. Yeah, our friends at Hydro use this too.
Yeah, I remember. So Hydro's in Chicago. They use additive manufacturing to create spare parts for their clients. Hydro refurbishes extremely old pumps and parts, such as impellers that we were talking about.
Yeah, the equipment itself is super old, and they're doing really cool stuff at Hydro. The old equipment drives this need for replacement parts, and in some cases, emergency replacement parts. And considering the age of these pumps, I wrote one story about an 80-year-old pump that's still working thanks to this kind of technology. The replacement parts are like obsolete. The manufacturers, if they're still around, don't even make that model of equipment anymore, that model of pump or whatever it is.
That's right.
And if they do make them, or if they are out there, they're not easily available. And then what further complicates the situation is the location of the manufacturers. They may be, as we said before, they may be on another continent. And cast parts that are manufactured outside of the United States have really long lead times. And most manufacturing facilities just cannot wait that long to get their equipment repaired. They can't have that much downtime. So 3D printing can really be a lifesaver in a situation like this.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's amazing. Sometimes we forget that manufacturers have to think about things like logistics. And while we're thinking about efficiency, cost is also part of that, right? So finding solutions is critical. And I think it's more than just that one focus thing, right? We do have to combine all of these different. So manufacturing is not just one element. It's got all these different aspects to it.
That's absolutely right. And many factors go into putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. This is actually a good segue for another trend that I want to mention. And I also find this super fascinating. And this is pilot plants.
Yes, these are really interesting. Pilot plants are all about removing the risk from large-scale manufacturing.
That's exactly right, Charlie. Okay. And they demonstrate the feasibility of proposed process technologies for real-world operations, and they help manufacturers remove this risk from full-scale projects. So instead of building a huge, gigantic plant for many, many millions of dollars, they can make a smaller scale plant and test the processing operation before they do it full scale. This is really cool, and this removes the risk. They can see ahead of time through these models whether it will work or not. So they'll start with something that's called a glass scale. It's a smaller industrial scale, and maybe it's like 2 evolutions down from that scale before they build the full scale, gigantic production plant. They know already that this is going to work. And there's just a really good, I wrote another article. I keep plugging all these articles. I'll put all the links in the show notes. But David Edwards, who works with a really cool company in Canada called Zeton, they make pilot plants for companies. And he says that the pilot plants are the true workhorse of the process development industry. And he talks about how chemical or biological processes are scaled from the laboratory to production, and pilot plants provide the first window into continuous processing as opposed to batch processing. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think it is too. I haven't really thought about it like this before, kind of reading your article, that this makes sense, right? Before you spend all of that money and kind of setting up the facility to stay around for a while, let's see what's the best process, the best layout, what we really need.
Absolutely. Yes. And so they'll make like these smaller scale, do the processing out, and then they say, okay, this works. Now we build it out and we put it into a bigger building with maybe we need 5 or 10 of these. They're usually modular, they're squares and they fit in very conveniently into a bigger warehouse. And so then they say, okay, this works. This is viable. It's worth the multi millions of dollars it takes to make it on a bigger scale. It just makes sense to try this, right?
That's right.
It's pretty cool. And another thing I want to talk about, Charli, and this is one of my favorite things that's happening in manufacturing right now. I'm really, really fascinated by how drones are being used in manufacturing. Have you heard anything from your clients about this?
Let me just be real. The first time I saw drones being used were you when you were traveling around taking these photographs from afar at the whole boat and ocean and everything else as you were sailing.
Yeah.
I had to bring that up because I was just fascinated with the coverage and how you can make that into videos. Videos for us to kind of tell the story. But I think that's also important for manufacturers. And I just met a woman in Birmingham who owns her own drone company. So I'm going to have to connect you with her.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Maybe she can be a guest on the show. That would be cool to dive into a deeper conversation about it because I'm really fascinated. So the drones that I used on my year-long sailing trip that you mentioned, I'll go ahead and plug that. Any consumer can use these. You do have to learn how to fly them, but you can fly and take aerial video and aerial images, just to use for YouTube videos or whatever you want to use them for. They're used in manufacturing a little bit differently and a little bit more, it's a little bit more complicated. So let's talk about that. Drones, which are also called unmanned aircraft systems. So a lot of times you'll see this UAS, unmanned aircraft systems. So if you see that UAS, that's a drone. Okay. But a lot of manufacturing people like to use the official name. So that's okay. We'll let them do that. But they are great for inspecting, for example. But the future is in analyzing the data they collect. These drones, they go really super high to the top of the facility where it's almost impossible for a human to get there. They take like thousands of pictures and collect all this data. Then they come back and then the engineers and the operators can figure out what's going wrong, how do they fix it, and it just gets to places that humans have a hard time getting to. It's really interesting. They can be as small as a pizza, right? Like the one that I had on the sailing trip was about the size, with all the things out, all the little arms out, it's about the size of a large pizza. Or they could be as large as a picnic table.
Oh my goodness. I can't imagine this.
They can get really big. Okay, so most of these that are used in manufacturing, they can't fly without a licensed pilot, and there are actually regulations. Like you have to be a pilot. They're like professional airline pilots who are becoming drone pilots because they need that kind of expertise. So it's really high tech. As I said, they can hover high above these facilities and gather the data. Formerly, you would need scaffolding or a big crane for a human to get up there and inspect it. Well, these drones can just fly up there and inspect it. So it's safer and it's more efficient. They get into hard to reach spots such as industrial piping. They can fly through that. But most important, they safely collect this valuable data in record time and with minimal risk of unnecessary shutdowns or the need for excessive manpower.
Yeah, you talked a lot about collecting the data, and I do believe that's the first step. But what about like analyzing the data? I do believe that's a critical step.
You are exactly right. You're right on with that. There's no question about that. And this is where companies like, I have an industry friend that owns this company called Industrial Skyworks. His name's Michael Cohen. He's a really smart guy. And this is where companies like his come into play. He does a lot of work like in the oil and gas industry. He says that it's a collision of two worlds. So the drones that are able to fly in and read the complex environments, they use things like sonar and lasers to understand where the walls are, say, in a big high-rise building. They're thinking in real time about how to avoid obstacles and duck under pipes and go through these thin channels in real time. And they'll fly through a manufacturing facility, and they're smart. These drones are smart. They learn the map of the facility. And so they're flying through and they don't slam into a piece of equipment, to damage the drone or the equipment. They learn it. And so they avoid the obstacles. Pretty cool stuff. It's very sci-fi.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I'm just amazed at all this digital world that we're living in and like what we can do. These innovations, they just keep getting more and more interesting and smart and cool. So,
no question.
So what ties all this together is big data and the industrial Internet of Things.
There's no question. Industry 4.0 is the name of the game for 2021. There's no question. Of course, all these things that we've talked about, drones and additive manufacturing and augmented reality, all this stuff is Industry 4.0. We were talking about smart technology, robotics, all this falls in line with Industry 4.0. And because of its adaptability and innovation and remote monitoring and of course, predictive maintenance capabilities, the industrial Internet of Things, it's going to remain a top trend in manufacturing this year and for many years down the road. There's no question, because people are seeing immediate results that save time and money by using this, what they call IIOT data, Industrial Internet of Things data. And it's having a profound effect on the way companies collect, manage, and especially, as you said, analyze this data. So, for example, Siemens, which we both know, we're both very familiar with Siemens. They're clients of yours and clients of mine. It's a global technology company, and it's really springing into action to provide digital technology strategies. So Siemens has spent more than $10 billion to acquire software companies in the past 10 years, and it employs almost 25,000 software engineers.
It's really amazing. And I know Industry 4.0 it's not this silver bullet for everything. It's just a major focus for these manufacturing industries and companies. And if you're not looking at this for the future of technology, and you're going to miss out. If you're not in it, you're not thinking about it, you're not connecting with people and talking about how this is going to improve your businesses, you're going to miss out on this global competitive market. More than 23,000 companies offer digital solutions worldwide.
Yeah, that right there.
Yes.
Yeah, that stat right there shows you how important it is to embrace Industry 4.0. And I have another podcast coming out in a couple of weeks with a man that's really an expert in this. And he talks about how these companies are doing this, how it's making it possible for small to medium-sized companies compete on the global level with the big budget companies. So it's really fascinating. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do just a little bit.
Think about that, Michelle, every time I think about us putting on that Empowering Women's Conference in last August, that I didn't know or have the resources like some of these larger trade shows, but I did take the risk and I was willing to learn and fail and hopefully learn some things that I could teach other people. And I think that that's part of it. It's that willingness to accept.
It is. It's all of it. It's all of it. If you just embrace a little bit, you said you weren't afraid to fail. That's the first step. The first step is just doing it. I've always said that making the decision is always the hardest part of anything. Once you've made the decision, then it's just the details. It's just figuring out and the organizing and making it happen.
Yeah, and I think about that with this podcast too, Michelle. I'm so proud of you for launching this and taking it on. And I'm, again, happy to be here as your first guest and honored. But you took it on, you learned how to do it. And I think that's just what we're asking everybody else to do.
That's right. And it depends on what you're doing. Everything's a challenge. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for being here and spending this time to talk about this because it's such an interesting and engaging topic. I know that we were only able to talk about a few of the manufacturing trends for 2021 in the time that we have, but I want to encourage everyone to check out my article on the website. Again, the link's in the show notes, and it talks a little bit more in depth about all the things that Charli and I mentioned, but it has a few more on there that you can read about and let me know what you think. So thanks again, Charli, for being my very first guest on the Factory of the Future podcast.
Well, you are very welcome, and thanks for having me. I super enjoyed it, like I do with all of your creations. And I'll just plug one more thing for Michelle. If y'all get a chance, go to the show notes and take a look at the books that she's created for manufacturing and modern manufacturing. She's the first one that I've seen do this and make it into an easy form for everybody to use and read. And so I think they're quite valuable, Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Charli. And they include 30 real-world case studies about different things that manufacturing companies are doing, just like some of the things that we talked about today. And it goes into their whole story of how and why they adapted this technology, and then how it produced results to them and the results that it produced. So it's really interesting stories from lots of different companies. So thank you for plugging that. And really this podcast is based on that book series. So that was the inspiration. And so we'll be talking a lot more about that. So Charli, I want to give you the last word. Is there anything else you want to tell us about manufacturing trends that we should be watching in 2021?
Yeah, well, I alluded to it earlier. I think mental health and really making sure that our workers, that we treat them as we would want to be treated, or even better than we'd want to be treated in some cases. I think it's important that, and you'll see a lot more conversations about that from us at Empowering Brands on leadership and mental health, and really making sure that we're drawing attention to these workers who have been behind the scenes, carrying us through this time, and making sure that we continue to better our workforce and make it more of an inclusive and welcoming environment. And that, some of these things are in place that keep them safe and keep them happy at work.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that again. It's so important, and we forget to put this on the list of trends. That's something we should be doing all the time. I would argue it's not really even a trend. It's something we just always need to be doing, is taking care of our people. That's for sure. Well, this has been a really fun and interesting conversation. I just want to remind the listeners that one of Charli's biggest passions is empowering other women and finding a way to do that in this industry that historically has had very few women in leadership roles. Charli has personally witnessed the attrition of exceptional women from the industry and strongly believes that sometimes they leave before achieving success, and this is principally due to the lack of a supportive professional network and mentors. With the acknowledgement that 1 in 4 female engineers leaves the field by age 30, Charli started Empowering Women in Industry as an initiative designed to help women persevere in male-dominated careers. Empowering Women in Industry seeks to connect, educate, and cultivate female leaders in industry through its website, empoweringwomeninindustry.com, which is an online community. And she also creates events, as we mentioned before, that empower women to work hard, accomplish goals, and be their best selves. Remember that Charli is also the host of the extremely popular Empowering Industry podcast. Check it out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. The links to all her websites and to the podcast are in the show notes. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.